In this video, I'm going to ask the question, should user stories be persona stories? If we think about user experience design or design thinking, humans are put at the center of the design process, right? And the personas that we have a name, you know how they think and feel, you've got a background of your persona, and they really form that sort of central part of your design. So as you go through your customer journeys, you think about your existing journeys from your persona's perspective, you think about your new customer journeys from your persona's perspective, and whether the pain points that the persona has been solved in those new experiences. And now if we move out of the world of user experience design and we move into the world of Agile, if we think about the requirements that we create when we're building a software project, we represent them in a backlog, and we tend to represent them as epics and then ultimately user stories. And the product owner will, of course, own those user stories and own that backlog, and will therefore refine those stories out and prioritize that backlog appropriately. But the form of the user story, if you think about it, is actually role based rather than persona based. So if we think of the form that exists today, a user story is in the as a, whatever your role is, I want whatever it is, whatever the goal is, so that blah, 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 you get a benefit. So let's take a good example. Let's say as a banking customer, I want a push notification whenever I go into overdraft so that I can take actions to avoid any unnecessary charges. Another user story could be as a banking customer, I want the ability to auto balance money from my savings account into my current account whenever I go into overdraft so that I can avoid unnecessary charges. Two different user stories that describe a feature that you may wish to implement, and they can get refined and broken down. But in both cases, they are role-based because it is, I am a banking customer, I'm a mobile user. So the problem with that approach is that we're losing the human centricity on the features. So if you think about when we were in the user experience and design thinking world, we were looking at things from a customer's perspective, and we made them a human. They had names. You would have Jemima, you would have Jesse, you would have different personas representing users of your system who had different needs and wants, and they would have their own personality, and you would understand their feelings and their background. But when you move into this user story world, that is lost and it's back to as a banking customer. So what would a persona based world look like? Well, quite simply, that would be as Jesse, as Jemima. And if we think of those stories, yeah, it would no longer be as a banking customer. It would be as Jesse. I want a push notification whenever I go into overdraft so that I can take actions to avoid unnecessary changes. Or it could be as Jemima. I want the ability to auto balance money from my savings account into my current account whenever I go into overdraft so that I can take the actions to avoid the unnecessary charges. Both of them are banking customer, but the two personas have different needs. Yeah, the Jesse persona could be a persona where you're just trying to avoid unnecessary charges. Maybe you don't have a savings account, or maybe you have a savings account with not very much money in that account. Whereas the Jemima persona really has money in the savings account and doesn't want to be hit with a charge because they've already got money in a different account. It's two different needs and wants and problem statements. But when I bring it into role-based world, that's lost because it's just a mobile user. We're no longer thinking about Jesse's need. We're no longer thinking about Jemima's need. And we can't sort of join these two things together. And I really love that approach. And as much as I would like to say I came up with it first, I didn't. I was thinking about it. I came up with the idea, and then actually I Googled it, and guess what? I found out somebody else already came up with this idea, and he called it persona stories, and it was a chap called William Hudson who wrote a paper on it in 2013. Absolutely brilliant. And actually it really has me thinking that this could be a good way forward. So why do I like this idea? Well, the first one is, as an architect, I don't like gaps, right? I don't like this movement between design thinking and features. And I've been talking about in a persona-based world, and then I move into a role-based world. And that means you lose things, and I don't like gaps, right? So if I can have consistency where I move from one world into another and I switch between the two, and I don't lose the richness of personas and I can have them represented, that's good. And even as an architect, that works for me as well, because if I look at the artifacts that I create, so if I think about system context diagrams, or if I think about interaction diagrams, etc., if I think about the users that you represent in these diagrams, then, well, you know what? It doesn't need to be a role type. It can be a persona, and that works fine. And actually, that brings me something deeper as well, because it means that we can check from an architectural perspective that all of the personas are being represented in the architecture and are interacting with the right point. So it gives a richness, and it gets rid of gaps. And I like getting rid of gaps. The second thing that I like is I like it's human centric. It means that as I go through the software development lifecycle, it's not just the designers that are thinking about the personas, the Jessies and Jemimas. The architects are thinking about it. The testers are thinking about it. The developers are thinking about it. So as they're developing those features, they're not just saying, "Go here as a user." They're thinking about what Jessie thinks, what Jemima thinks, right? And from a testing perspective, they start to do more persona-based testing as opposed to functional testing, and that means that by putting users at the forefront of our development and testing, so that when we get into things like user acceptance testing, it means that the gap between the system testing and the functional testing is smaller, because we've taken our users into consideration, and therefore there's less gaps in that sense. It also means that as we're working with our sponsored users, as we're working with the people who represent our customers, again, we've got direct links to the right type of customer. Who is the Jessie? Who is the Jemima? And then when people are doing the user acceptance testing as well, so the actual users, then we've got real representation of those personas. So I really like the fact that it makes the development cycle and the testing cycle tighter. The next thing that I really like about that, it also helps a product owner, because it makes prioritization easier as well. Because before, if you think about the features, it was looking at things from saying as a banking customer, but now we're looking at it saying as Jessie, as Jemima. And you can look at your system and say, well, actually, is Jemima's needs greater than Jessie's? Have I got more Jemimas than Jessie's, or have I got more Jessies than Jemimas? So it really starts to really challenge those prioritization calls and allow you to sort of understand what the key features are in that sense. The other one is it kind of theoretically makes your MVPs easier, because if you can represent all of Jessie's needs or all of Jemima's needs, then it's going to be easier to get that thin slice through your customer, right? Because you're really going to understand, have I met all of the needs of this particular persona? And guess what? If you met all the needs of a particular persona, that might be enough to go live with. That could be that thin slice of functionality. So you could say, actually, this first release, I don't need to represent Jemima. I only need to represent Jessie's needs. And therefore, that makes it easier to get your functionality out into production. And then as you expand, you can start representing more personas, potentially. So, question to everybody here: what do you think? Right? Could we be bringing our personas across the software development lifecycle more? Is there more opportunity to link that up? Are we jumping to role types too much? Maybe everybody here is already doing that. So, if you are, I'd love to hear about it. And again, maybe I'm being crazy. Love to get everybody's kind of thinking, etc. But that's kind of my thoughts on where we are. Anyway, thanks. Speak soon.